Hi, I'm Mitch Gallagher. Welcome to the Sweetwater Minute. Thanks for joining me this week. Today we have a really special treat. We're here with Ken Scott. Ken is one of the most notable engineers in the business. He's been working for 40 years or so in the
We
industry.
discovered on the flight the other day that I'm in my fifth decade of having hits,
All
thanks
right.
to the reissue of the Beatles stuff. Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank
Congratulations.
you.
His discography is immense and incredible. So, what I thought we'd do today is have a little bit of fun. I think we'll play a word association game with Ken. And let's begin by just starting with maybe the most obvious word from your career Beatles.
Reissues. Finally, the mono editions are back out on the market again, which is the way the Beatles from the beginning through to the White Album should be listened to, because that's what we were going for. That's what all the Beatles ever heard to agree to the final thing. It was the monos. The stereos were just thrown together at a later date.
Right. So, at the time, how exciting was it to work with the Beatles?
In the very well, the first time I ever saw them walking around the studio, I was almost like a teenage girl. I wanted to scream at the top of my voice.
Right.
But then once I started to work with them, it was work. I was learning my trade, my gig. So the excitement kind of wore off very quickly. I was more interested in learning my job.
Great. Uh, Pink Floyd.
Sid Barrett. uh, I got to do the last single with when Sid was a member of the band at Apples and Oranges and Paintbox were the two songs, and then the first track with David Gilmour, which was Corporal Clegg. I just Gilmour was phenomenal. Immediately you knew he was good. Sid was, as we all know, he was weird. He was strange. I went through one session after he'd left Floyd. I was booked on a Saturday session to do some work with Sid, and the sessions at EMI were all 10 till 1, 2:30 to 5:30, 7 to 10. So I arrive at about 2 o'clock to set up, and we had no idea of the musicians that were coming in or anything like that, so I couldn't do anything and was waiting and waiting. Come 5:30, no one's shown up, so myself and the second engineer, of course, go around the pub for a bite to eat, and got back at about 7 for the evening session. And as we walk in, the security guy at the front said, Sid Barrett came by for you to do a session or something, and when you weren't here he said, I'll come back later. And he went, and we waited until 10. He still hadn't shown up again. We went home, and I heard the next day that he turned up at 11 o'clock asking where we were to start the session. So,
Wonderful.
yeah, weird.
David Bowie.
Phenomenal singer, phenomenal writer. When I worked with him, ultimate professional. The vocals, just as an example, 95% of all the vocals that I ever recorded with David were one take from beginning to end. That was it.
Wow.
First take from beginning to end. I remember one song where we had to punch in, and that was set up in advance because his vocal level changed so much. I had to readjust everything to compensate for that. Apart from that, beginning to end, one take. Nothing to put them in tune. They were already like that. So
Amazing.
yeah, great,
Amazing.
great time.
One of my favorites, Dixie Dregs.
Steve Morse, one of the, if not the best guitarist I've ever worked with, in my humble opinion. He had the chops to play as many notes as he could do in a 5-second interval, or if one note would do it for a solo for 5 minutes, he'd hold on to one note for that. He had the ability for that. And also Rod Morgenstein, great drummer. He's part of my new project, Epic Drums. He's one of them. Great guy, and what an amazing drummer. And
Right. Speaking of amazing drummers, and someone else who's in your Epic Drums project, Missing Persons, Terry Bozzio.
Bozzio.
And earlier today, you told me a story about Frank Zappa and your involvement with Missing Persons.
Well, the way I got involved with that was when I first moved to California. I had, unknowingly to start with, we were renting a house opposite Frank's house, and my family got to know his family, and through those all getting together, I got to know Frank. One Saturday afternoon, this was much later, one Saturday afternoon I got a phone call from Gail, Frank's wife, and she said, I've got Terry Bozzio, Dale Bozzio and Warren Cucurullo up here. They've just started this band. Would you take a listen to their tapes? And yeah, sure. So 5 minutes later, they were at my front door, and it was one of the worst demo tapes I've ever heard in my life. But went to see them rehearse, and for whatever reason, I'm thinking back on it. It must have been because Bozzio is so good. No matter how bad they were, I said, "Yeah, we got to work together," and finished up doing demos at Frank's studio. One of which became the most requested record of the year on one of the top LA radio stations. We eventually got a deal. I managed them, produced them, engineered, and it was a great time. And
Amazing.
Bozzio is the most musical drummer I've ever worked with. That just everything he plays is part of the music. It's not just to keep the beat.
Mm-hmm. So it pays to pay attention to who you're moving across the street from.
Oh yeah, absolutely, every time.
Wonderful. Supertramp.
Crime of the Century, one of, if not my favourite albums I ever did. It caused me major problems for a while. After completing the album, I felt that was the best I could ever do. It was perfection for me.
Mm-hmm.
So for the next 2 albums after that, trying to match up to it there's no way I could do it. Then I reached a point where I could listen to Crime of the Century, and you know what? I wish the drums weren't quite so dead. I wish I'd done it this way. And I started to find fault with it, and then suddenly it was, I can do better, fine, and carry on from there.
Move on from there.
For a short time, it was very tough.
Wonderful. 2 incredible albums you worked on were Jeff Beck's Truth and There and Back. Mm-hmm. So the next word would be Beck.
Very strange. I've run the gamut with Jeff, and I can't say moods, but his psychology. Let's put it that way. When I first did Truth, he was known, but not that big, and we did the album. It was great. We had a blast doing it. The album came out. They toured the States. Suddenly, it was the greatest band on earth. They were gods. The whole thing. First day we're going to do the next album, they come in, the egos are unbelievable. It didn't work. We called it quits fairly quickly. Then I got to work with Jeff several times on Stanley Clarke albums. He would come in and he just guessed on one track, and Jeff was great then. Then I got called to do There and Back, and by this time Jeff is the complete opposite. He didn't feel good enough to be working with the musicians that he was working with, and so at that point it was trying to coax performances out of him, which was probably even harder than dealing with a massive ego, but
right.
We got it and it worked well. But I've seen him from being a great guy to the ego out to complete lack of ego. He's great.
Right.
What a guitarist.
Speaking of Stanley Clarke, you also worked on School Days,
Yes.
which is a seminal album as well. What can you tell us about that?
When we recorded it, it was the height of Quad, the 4-speaker setup that preceded 5.1. And most of the stuff that was being done at that time, they just go in and remix an album that had already been done. They do it in an afternoon, and it was just a joke. For the major labels, it was just a way of making fast money. Mm-hmm. So when we were going to do School Days, Stan and I went to Atlantic and said, you know what, we'd love to actually record this specifically for Quad. Atlantic, we're all over it. What a great idea. Yeah, let's do it. We can really use that for promotion and all of that kind of thing. And so that's what we did. We mixed it Quad, and the day we were going to master it, I get a phone call from Atlantic. You know what, can we do it in stereo instead? We're not sure about Quad. So we had never mixed it in stereo, so we just had to combine the back with the front, and that's what came out. So it'd be very easy to turn it into 5.1 for today. And from what I remember, I've never heard it that way again, but from what I remember, it was really good in surround sound. Yeah, so would I.
That'd be great.
We'll see.
I'd like to thank Ken Scott for joining me for this installment of the Sweetwater Minute. We appreciate you coming by. And in fact, Ken's going to be here again next week. We're going to continue with part 2 of this conversation because we have a lot more to talk about. So please come back. I'm Mitch Gallagher. Thanks for joining me for the Sweetwater Minute.